This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. 11 countries first began to use the euro in 1999. Today, 17 of the 27 members of the European Union are in the euro area. The euro's foreign exchange value has remained strong against the dollar and other currencies. But economic growth in the euro area was only 0.2% from April to June. Europe's biggest economy, Germany, grew at half that rate. Ireland, Portugal, and Greece have all required rescues. Greece received emergency loans twice. Debt and other problems in southern Europe remain a big concern. In early August, the European Central Bank bought more than $30 billion in Italian and Spanish debt securities. Italy and Spain have yet to recover from the worldwide recession. The purchases of their government debt helped reduce their borrowing costs, but the bank will probably have to act again. On August 16th, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy met in Paris. They discussed economic governance for the euro area and cooperation on budget and tax policies. Chancellor Merkel said, "We want France and Germany to move closer in terms of fiscal integration." Their proposal calls for a true European economic government. It would include the leaders of the 17 euro countries and would be led by the European Union president. The group would meet at least twice a year. One goal would be to control budget deficits for euro area countries. Rules limit the deficits of EU members to 3% of the size of their economies. But many members, including France, have bigger deficits than that. The two leaders also proposed a tax on financial dealings in Europe. But they did not support the idea of euro bonds. These would be loans guaranteed by all euro countries instead of only the governments seeking them. The European Commission says it supports the French and German proposals. The Commission proposes and enforces legislation for the EU. An EU spokesman said, "We already mentioned the need to strengthen the economic part of the economic and monetary union. What is happening now since the beginning of the crisis and what has been announced as a proposal by France and Germany go exactly in this direction." But many experts question whether European countries will be willing to surrender individual powers and deal with their debt problems together. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. America's biggest car maker accepted $50 billion in federal aid from the Obama and Bush administrations. People joked that GM meant government motors. Now General Motors could be on the road to recovery. The company recorded over $2.5 billion in profit in the first half of the year. The government still owns 61% of GM as a result of the bailout. Canada is also a shareholder. But now GM plans to sell stock to the public again. GM spent just 40 days in bankruptcy. It sought protection from its creditors in June of last year. GM restructured. It discontinued some vehicles and closed dealerships and factories. In April, GM repaid almost $7 billion in government loans. Many of its creditors are waiting to see how much they get. GM plans an IPO, an initial public offering of stock, later this year. The company could raise as much as $15 billion. Chief Executive Edward Whittaker left the company September 1st. He wants the government to sell all of its shares in the company during the IPO. Many experts believe the Treasury will act slowly over time after the public offering is completed. If the stock price rises, the government could profit from the rescue. But the IPO is risky for the company. The offering will test the willingness of investors to take an equity share in the new GM. Buying equity is not like buying bonds. Bonds represent a loan. Equity represents ownership. Investors willing to buy equity shares in a company expect one thing: growth. GM believes it can make that happen, in part with a new electric and gas hybrid car. The Chevrolet Volt can go up to 64 kilometers before it uses any gas at all. The Volt is expected to start arriving in showrooms later this year. GM is also looking overseas. The world's fastest-growing car markets are in developing nations. GM is now selling more cars in China than in the United States. GM still leads the American market, although Toyota is now the biggest car company in the world. There are signs that America's big three car makers may have put the worst of their recent troubles behind them. Chrysler also went through bankruptcy and says its sales are up. Italy's Fiat holds a 20% share. Ford Motor Company avoided bankruptcy and refused government help. Ford reported close to $5 billion in profit for the first 6 months of the year. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The best example of something is often called the gold standard. It sets the standard against which other things are measured. In economics, the term describes how major trading nations once used gold to set currency values and exchange rates. Many nations continued to use the gold standard until the last century. In the United States, people could exchange paper money for gold from the 1870s until 1933. President Richard Nixon finally disconnected the dollar from the value of gold in 1971. Some politicians from time to time call for a return to the gold standard. But in 1978, the International Monetary Fund ended an official gold price. The IMF also ended the required use of gold in transactions with its member countries. Since that time, gold prices have grown, but unevenly. Prices, uncorrected for inflation, have hit record highs recently, above $1,400 an ounce. But people keep buying. Nyang Chan Nguyen is a gold shop owner in the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh, and says, "Some of my customers have even bought more as they believe the price will probably go higher. I sell more gold at these higher prices." Some people are gold bugs. These are investors who say people should buy gold to protect against inflation. People have valued gold for thousands of years. The soft, dense metal polishes to a bright yellow shine and resists most chemical reactions. It makes a good material for money, political power, and, more recently, electrical power. If you own a device like a mobile phone or a computer, you might own a little gold in the wiring. The gold standard was the subject of one of the best-known speeches in American political history. It took place at the 1896 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. William Jennings Bryan wanted the country to use both gold and silver as money. The idea was to devalue the dollar and make it easier for farmers to pay their debts. Bryan said, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." This speech made William Jennings Bryan famous. He was a presidential candidate 3 times, but he never won. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn more about the world every day and learn English at the same time at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. China says it has passed Germany and become the world's top exporter. Exports totaled more than $1 trillion last year. That was down from 2008, but about 30 billion more than Germany. China's influence in the world has increased with its fast-growing economy. The United States remains the largest economy. China is third and gaining on Japan. Manufacturing has expanded, fueling exports. But China has not imported as much as its trade partners would like. Its policies about valuing its currency and its human rights record have also created tensions. And now there is a new dispute. China is the world's largest internet market, but Google says it may leave. The company said it was targeted by a major internet attack launched from China in December. It says intellectual property was stolen, and the attackers sought access to Gmail accounts of Chinese human rights activists. At least 20 other large companies in different industries were also targeted. Also, the company said it is no longer willing to censor search results as required by Chinese law. Google says it is still observing censorship laws, but it will hold talks with the government in the coming weeks. Google.cn launched 4 years ago. Google is estimated to have around a 30% share of the search market in China. But that is only about half the share of the Chinese search engine Baidu. Baidu also reported an attack on its website in January. Online advertising sales in China are estimated to bring Google only a few $100 million a year. Not much for such a big company, notes business expert Fariborz Gadar at Penn State University. He says Google has to make a decision. It can stay in China, or it can move out so as to protect its name and brand, because of the restrictions and cyber attacks. Online activity in China is closely watched, and the government tries to limit access to many sites, including VOA. In January, a foreign ministry spokeswoman said, China's internet is open and that Chinese law bars cyber attacks. Another government official said China itself is the victim of a growing number of foreign attacks. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said she would like an explanation from the Chinese about Google's accusations. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. You can find more reports about economics at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Finance ministers from the Euro area met in Poland in the middle of September to discuss the Greek debt crisis. American Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner joined them. Fabian Zulig, chief economist at the European Policy Center in Brussels, said the United States was right to get involved. The intervention from the U.S. has also shown at least a risk that the stability of the financial system as a whole, the global financial system, might be under threat again. Earlier, the leaders of France, Germany, and Greece held a conference call to discuss how to contain Europe's deepening financial crisis. Germany and France are Europe's two largest economies. 17 European Union countries use the euro as their currency. On September 15th, 5 major central banks agreed to lend additional dollars to European banks in the Eurozone. The European Central Bank says the 3-month loans will provide as many dollars as the banks need. The operations will end in December. The European Central Bank is acting with the United States Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and the Swiss National Bank. The announcement helped lift European bank shares and major European stock lists. The Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has lowered its growth estimates for the euro area. In Greece, the economy has shrunk this year. German Chancellor Angela Merkel urged Eurozone nations to do everything possible to avoid an uncontrolled insolvency by Greece. On September 13th, she warned that problems would quickly spread if Greece failed to pay its international rescue loans. And, she said, if the euro fails, Europe fails. The next day, European Commission President José Manuel Barroso spoke to the European Parliament. He announced that the Commission would propose creating euro bonds. The idea is for Eurozone governments to jointly guarantee their debts. Germany and France have opposed such bonds. Mr. Barroso also said the current system that lets individual countries easily block policy is not working. I am convinced we need a deeper and more results-driven integration. A system based purely on intergovernment cooperation has not worked in the past and will not work in the future. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Greece's debt crisis has shaken investors in the United States and worldwide. They worry that it could spread far beyond Greece. On May 6th, a day after huge protests in Athens, the Greek parliament approved a series of spending cuts. Greece has to cut $30 billion as part of a bailout deal with the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. The deal is for $145 billion in loans. The cuts include wage freezes and reductions in retirement pay for government workers. Critics say the austerity plan will hurt the poor especially. But Greek labor costs are high even for Europe. And Greece's public debt is equal to at least 115% of its economy. The cuts may be the only hope to avoid declaring bankruptcy. Sebastian Galli is senior currency strategist for the French bank BNP Paribas. He says other European countries delayed rescuing Greece because it was politically unpopular. Now they are paying for it. European countries promised to make 80 billion euros in loans available over the next 3 years. The International Monetary Fund promised 30 billion. The quality of Greek government debt is now rated at junk levels. The high risk has investors demanding higher interest rates, and not only on Greek debt. Portugal and Spain have also had their credit ratings reduced. Both borrowed from credit markets, and both had to pay far higher rates than Germany, the safest investment in the euro area. The euro is 11 years old and used as the currency of 16 countries. But less trust in the euro has reduced its value to the lowest levels in over a year. Sebastian Galli says growth expectations for the euro area have dropped. This has affected producers of raw materials, such as Australia, Brazil, and Canada. But he says the falling euro should help ease the crisis. He expects the exchange rate against the dollar to reach 1-to-1 within a year. That would be good news for European countries with heavy debt loads. He said, the lower the euro is, the more competitive these economies become, and, therefore, the more the fiscal concerns are going to be reduced. While the euro has fallen, the dollar has gained value. Investors, fleeing risk, have bought dollars and American debt. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Greece has approved a plan to cut spending, raise taxes, and sell government-owned assets. The approval cleared the way for $17 billion in loans from the International Monetary Fund and the European Union. The loans are a share of the $156 billion rescue deal that Greece secured last year. The money will help the government to operate and pay its debts until the middle of September. But the austerity plan led to a 2-day general strike in Greece and violent demonstrations in Athens. Several hundred protesters and police were injured. Parliament approved the plan on June 29th and agreed to the details the next day. Prime Minister George Papandreou won more support than expected for his proposals. He appealed to Parliament to do everything possible to avoid defaulting on the debts of the birthplace of democracy. There is a choice, he said. We can remain a Greece which has a huge public sector, or change to a Greece which has an effective, democratic, and productive public sector. Greece is expected to seek more international help, even though years of government borrowing led to the crisis. Many protesters said their government is making decisions that only serve the interests of wealthy nations. But other Greeks see the need for austerity. One man said, "I think the policies are a good step towards finding common ground with the European Union. I don't think any country can operate in isolation these days, especially a country the size of Greece." On June 28th, the IMF chose French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde as its new managing director. Dominique Strauss-Kahn resigned in May after he was accused of sexually assaulting a hotel cleaning woman in New York. But on July 1st, a judge released Mr. Strauss-Kahn from house arrest as the investigation continued. Prosecutors raised questions about the believability of the accuser. The IMF has always been led by a European, but Ms. Lagarde is the first woman. She received support from the United States and European nations, as well as Russia, Brazil, and China. She has promised to be a strong voice for developing countries, especially in Asia and Africa. But international monetary expert Domenico Lombardi says she can also pressure other European finance ministers to take a more aggressive stance on the European crisis. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Big stock exchanges in the United States are linked in what is known as the National Market System Plan. The idea is to process deals and report the best available prices to the public as quickly as possible. But there are other ways of investing that operate outside the national market system. In the late 1990s, the Securities and Exchange Commission wanted to make room for new ideas in financial trading. The Commission developed new rules for exchanges and for what are known as alternative trading systems. Alternative trading systems are operated by brokers or dealers. They mainly serve big investors like retirement funds, universities, and financial companies. These systems trade the same public stocks as other market players do, but they do not publicly report their trades. This secrecy explains why they also have another name, dark pools. As of October, there were 86 alternative trading systems registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. A buy or sell order for a large amount of stock can move markets. It can influence other investors to try to buy or sell shares of that same stock. Supporters of alternative trading systems say the secrecy reduces the risk of a disorderly market. But the International Monetary Fund has concerns about alternative trading systems. It says they limit the ability of the investing public to price a security effectively. Also, the IMF says the activity of these trading systems is largely outside the reach of market regulators. Another alternative to the investing methods that most people know is the work of so-called angel investors. These are individuals who invest in new projects, and not just internet startups that hope to become the next Google or Facebook. They could also be small local businesses. Steve Moore made a lot of money in the software business. After he retired, he made an interest-free loan to Christy and Keith Kistler. The couple operate a small organic farm in Washington State. They could not get a bank loan to build their business. In return, Mr. Moore received a minority share of their business. The Center for Venture Research at the University of New Hampshire says angel investing fell more than 6% nationwide in the first half of last year. Still, angel investments during that period totaled $8.5 billion. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. American children and teenagers have increased their use of entertainment media by more than 1 hour a day in the last 5 years. On an average day, they now spend 7.5 hours using media. These are the findings of a new survey. It included devices like TVs, computers, mobile phones, and MP3 players, but also media like books and magazines. It did not count media use for school. Vicki Rideout at the Kaiser Family Foundation, a health research group, wrote the report. She was surprised that kids could fit even more media time into their day. She found that they spent 10 hours and 45 minutes if you counted each device individually. But children multitask a lot. And Vicki Rideout says this is not necessarily a good thing. She says, people who study the brain will tell you that you can't actually multitask in that way. You're really switching back and forth sequentially from different tasks, just doing it rapidly. And you don't really do either task as well as you would do them if you did them one at a time. The study suggests a link between heavy media use and lower performance in school. About 1/4 of those who used media the least reported that their grades were mostly average or below. But that was true of half the heavy media users. So where are the parents? Children who had any rule limiting the use of any kind of media were exposed to an average of about 3 hours less media a day. But only 1/3 of children had to follow any rules. Girls spent more time than boys on social networking sites, listening to music and reading. Boys spent more time on video games, an average of 48 minutes more a day than girls. Some other findings. Time spent reading books has not dropped in the last 5 years. But time with newspapers and magazines has, though some reading now takes place online. Blacks and Hispanics use media over 4 hours more a day than other groups. And for all children, media use appears to reach its highest point between the ages of 11 and 14. Vicki Rideout will try to explain these findings in future research. The report is based on more than 2,000 students ages 8 to 18. They took a written survey in class through May of last year. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
I'm Carolyn Persutti with the VOA Special English Economics Report. State and local governments across the United States are facing big budget deficits. Many of these shortfalls include promises of future retirement payments for public employees. Several states have had to borrow money for pension plans that have fallen below required funding levels. Pay and benefits for public workers have been a target as state and local governments try to cut spending. At the same time, there are efforts in several states to reduce the negotiating rights of public employees. In many cases, public employee unions have agreed to accept lower pay, but they oppose efforts to limit collective bargaining. An effort by Republicans to do that in Wisconsin led protesters to occupy the state capitol building. Almost every state requires a balanced budget, yet worries that state and local governments might not be able to repay their debts are now adding to the costs of borrowing. Illinois had to offer a high return of nearly 6% on bonds to be repaid by 2019. Experts say on average, public employees are paid less but have better benefits than workers with similar skills in private jobs. However, they say these differences in labor costs are a lot less than some people think. Still, traditional pension plans pay a set amount for as long as a retiree lives. States like Georgia, Michigan, Colorado, and Ohio are considering a change for future employees. They might offer retirement plans similar to what are called 401k plans. These are a common form of plan offered by private employers. Employers and workers both put money into the plan. Workers can invest the money in stocks or bonds. Their retirement savings are defined by the return on their investments in the plan. Federal workers already have a savings plan similar to a 401k. John McGlennon heads the government department at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. He says the economic crisis of 2008 continues to affect state and local tax collections. Also, many pension funds have less money because their investments have yet to fully recover from the recession. But Professor McGlennon says things could change. He says states might not be in good financial condition in the next few years, but they usually recover more quickly than we think they will. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In June, leaders and top finance officials from the world's 20 biggest economies gathered in Toronto, Canada. One of the big issues they discussed is how and when to reduce deficits and economic growth measures as conditions improve. Chancellor Angela Merkel defended Germany's decision to cut spending by $100 billion over 4 years. But some experts say the world economy is still too weak for Europe's biggest country to reduce spending. Earlier this year, Germany was slow to react to the Greek debt crisis. European countries later had to agree to a nearly $1 trillion rescue for the euro area. Other countries, including Britain, France, and Japan, have also announced cuts. But American Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner says, "Without growth now, deficits will rise further and undermine future growth." Economists also point out that spending cuts alone do not solve the problems of countries with structural economic problems. G20 nations are also struggling with financial reform issues. These include new rules for risky financial products and closer supervision of banks. In June, Britain's finance minister announced a new tax on big banks. Germany and France are considering similar measures to pay for future financial problems. President Obama proposed the idea for the United States in January. But how many countries will join Britain is not clear. 19 countries and the European Union form the Group of 20, including developing economies like Brazil, China, India, and Russia. Economist Sebastian Mallaby at the Council on Foreign Relations says G20 nations should work together on financial reforms. G20 nations also face the issue of trade imbalances, like the one between the United States and China. China said it would not discuss the dispute over its currency at the Toronto summit. But China announced it will slowly let the value of the yuan rise. It later reached its highest exchange rate in 2 years. China's export prices may rise, but an American diplomat said the action takes an irritant off the table in the U.S.-China relationship. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. For more news about economics, visit our website at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also comment on our programs and find transcripts, MP3s, and podcasts.